Very, very, very special occasion. You know, it is the first time in 20 years of IDFA that we can welcome Mr. Werner Harzog here in Amsterdam at IDFA. So I'm so proud of that, you can't imagine, because I love his film and I think we all do love his films. Otherwise you wouldn't be here with so many people. But first, before we get Mr. Werner Harzog here on stage, I would love to introduce you to the moderator of today and give him really a big, big hand because he's working so hard and he's doing his work so good. Mr. Peter Wintonic.
Well, we're all very excited. I think Werner actually did the top 10 selection here at IDFA one year, but Werner didn't show up, and we're so happy that he's here. Now we've enjoyed the White Diamond, and Grizzly Man is playing again this year because it's on the top 20 of all time films that have played here at IDFA, and of course the premiere here internationally of Encounters, so we'll get to have a kind of dialogue about that. But really this is not a master class, it's a conversation with a master, and it's not going to be me talking to him. It's really going to be about you and your questions about his long and prolific career in cinema and in documentary. I have a little 5-minute little introduction in these kinds of conversations and events. Usually there's an academic to spout out biographies and tell us all about the great man, but in this case, it won't be too much of a lie. Perhaps I seek certain utopian things, space for human honor and respect, landscapes not yet offended, planets that do not exist yet, dreamed landscapes. Very few people seek these images today. That's a quote from Werner Harzog. Once upon a time, it was actually in 1982, my friend and I, Ron Mann, he's a Canadian documentary filmmaker, we were making a film about performed poetry with William Burroughs and others, and Allen Ginsberg. And we went to the Cannes Film Festival thinking that we could sell a film about poetry. We were kind of foolish in that. We were in this big hotel lobby, meeting a distributor thinking this was a big chance, and actually he turned out to be a distributor of porn. So we got really, really depressed, but then all of a sudden we see Werner Harzog coming into the hotel and checking in. We ran across, because he was one of our heroes, a kind of true cinema artist, I would call it, one of the planet's most important post-European filmmakers. We really got excited. This is the man who would say to the world is not just made for filmmaking. You have to know that every time you make a film, you must be prepared to wrestle it away from the devil himself, but carry on, damn it, ignite the fire. This is the kind of information I think that young filmmakers really have to take to heart. Most of Werner's 6 decades have been about the gargantuan struggle to wrestle the ecstatic truth out of the hands of the sham artists, the bureaucrats, the factualists, the myth-mongers, the verite liars, and those who would analyze him. Although he is most publicly known for his feature fiction films, Aguirre, The Wrath of God, and Fitzcarraldo, and Casper, Hauser, and Nosferatu, and Invincible, and those kinds of films, only really a kind of dozen of those films, of his 55 or 60 films, could be considered those kinds of narrative fictions. The rest are what we would call documentaries, and what he would call documentaries with quotation marks. I've always considered him as a major documentarian, since he's made so many of them. For Werner, the boundary between fiction and documentary simply does not exist. This is, again, another quote, or a misquote. They are all just films. Both take facts, characters, stories, and play with them in the same kind of way. IDFA is really pleased to offer 2 of his films here. Later on this afternoon, we'll look at Grizzly Man in this room, and he'll be available for a Q&A, and then later tonight, Encounters will be here as well. Most of Werner's films seem to struggle with the definition of form itself, between the false factualism of traditional orthodox, I call them, and his own interpretive dance with the creative reworking of reality. He might claim to be apolitical, but in a very real sense, these films are about the body politic in the broadest sense, the rights of ordinary heroes in extraordinary circumstances, the triumph of the humanist will, the merge of landscape and mindscape, optimism and hope. It is the battle to find truth in illusion, the fact in fiction. It is a lesson in hope and light within the ether of this current darkness. But here are a few facts. Most of them are close to the truth, and you can decide. His real name is Werner Stipchik. It's hard for me to pronounce. I'm not sure if that's right. He was born September 1942 in Munich. From the moment he could think, he knew he would make films. He never had a choice about becoming a director. At 14, he began to travel on foot. He almost walked around the edge of the German border, the German frontier. In 1974, he walked from Munich to Paris to see his mentor and friend, Lotte Eisner, who was dying. He briefly converted to Catholicism. He has problems seeing filmmaking as a real profession. He thinks bureaucracy kills filmmaking. His family shared a rooming house in Berlin with Klaus Kinski. He once lived in Manchester and has traveled extensively in Africa and South America. At 15, he entered a script writing competition and won. He taught himself filmmaking. He never attended a film school. In 1963, he accepted a Fulbright grant at the University of Pittsburgh, where he lasted 3 days. He always writes his scripts very, very quickly, like in a kind of manic way. He made his first phone call at 17 years old. In 1962, using the salary he earned working nights as a welder, he made his first film. He's a cinemanthropologist, a word we've just made up, and I'm sure he would hate the word, but because he's kind of analytical, I think. He once said that cinema comes from the country fair and the circus, not from art and academicism. His goal is to find out more about humankind and film it. His films resonate with the collective consciousness. He's a poet, although he probably would object to such labels. Most things that critics and cinephiles and people like me say and write about him are untrue. Most of the facts in this little speech are not false. His reputation thus sullied, he refers to such distortions as his doppelgangers, the reputation that sort of follows him, as media fabrications that roam the globe independently of himself. He tries to be a good soldier of cinema, or a warrior, as he told us last night at the talk show. He does not exploit people. He has hypnotized actors for a movie and asked people to pull a large ship over a mountain. He is not mad. He has a reasonable ego. No one has been killed in the making of his movies. He's almost died many times over. He is a mythographer. He is part or not part of the second wave of post-war, Oberhausenist, Reconstructivist, new wave German cinema makers. He's a surrealist in the tradition of pre-war mountain films from Germany. He's not part of any movement. He has no doppelgangers or equals. He is not a genius. His own mother said, when he was in school, Werner never learned anything. After his parents' divorce, his mother raised Werner and his brother. When a bomb destroyed their house, they moved to a village called Schackgrang in Bavaria. He grew up poor. He was introverted as a child. He has 3 children. One of them is here. His office is in Germany. He lives in California. He's controversial. He's a collaborator. He once worked in a Mexican rodeo. Most of what you've heard about him is untrue. He has concern with craftsmanship, with non-dogmatic expressionism, with innocence and landscapes and language and poetics and music, and bridging communication gaps and compassion and holiness found in real people. He's directed opera and he's written books and he works extensively. He has said, I am a hard-working man and that's that. There's no romanticism in me. Posterity can kiss my ass. welcome to the stage, please, Werner Harzog. I don't know how much of that is true or not. Would you be a good witness to the truth about yourself?
In a way, yes, but we shouldn't care too much about that. Whether there are slight misunderstandings or distortions of things, it doesn't really matter. Who cares? Even in your introduction, yes, a few things. At age 15, I didn't walk along the border of Germany. I actually walked along the border of Albania, which at that time was terra incognita for Europe. No visas. No one was allowed to enter the country. So, and I was very, very curious to see it. I couldn't get a visa, so as literally as a not grown up, I was still some sort of a child. I walked along the border from Greece all the way to the Dalmatian coast, but always really at the border, which across from Albania, of course, you have an extensive belt of Albanian population, like in Kosovo, also in Macedonia, and that was that.
So, but you had ambitions to walk around Germany, did you?
No ambition. I walked around Germany for, in this case, the only political sort of gesture that I did. I remember that back in something like 1984 or so, Willy Brandt, at that time Chancellor, and I liked him, declared in an official declaration at the Bundestag that the book of the German unification was closed. And I had the feeling this was something a German chancellor could not say, was not allowed, because there was an inevitable, irrevocable desire of the German culture and German people to reunite. No matter how you may think here, of course, I'm talking to you in Holland, and Holland had suffered from Germany, but it was not the sort of big power Germany coming back. It's a kind of historical necessity, the same one that you will see or you still can see in Korea. You still can see it in a way in Ireland. And Ireland will be reunited. Maybe it takes 300-400 more years, but it will be reunited. And I had the feeling nobody, if politics had abandoned the cause of German reunification, it was only the poets left to do that. And I walked from the small village Sachrang, by the way, in Bavaria, which is right at the Austrian border. I walked really the exact borderline of Germany along Austria and then along Switzerland, France, Belgium, Holland, Luxembourg, Denmark, and I never completed the walk because I fell ill. And I had to go to hospital, so that is an unfinished business. But I had the feeling like surrounding Germany and holding it together like with a belt. It was only the poets, only our language, only our culture that would eventually hold it together. And I was completely wrong how long it would take until that would happen, reunification, and it was a great moment of exuberance for me when I heard far away from Germany with 8 days delay that the wall had come down, and I knew this was the first step into reunification.
The image I have from the book that you worked on writing with Paul Cronin, Herzog on Herzog, the image I have from the book is a strong image of you and your brother, Luki, when you were really small kids living in, I guess it was in Bavaria, during the war, and it seems to me from my vision of the book that a bomb almost came through your window and wiped out the house next door.
that was in Munich, where I was born, and I lived in Munich, or stayed in Munich only for 2 weeks, until there was one of the very first bombardments of major cities, among them Munich. And my mother found me under a thick layer of debris and glass shards in my cradle, and of course I was unhurt. But she, of course, like any mother would be afraid, and she fled into the mountains, the most remote you can find in the entire Bavarian mountains, Sachrang, and that's where I grew up.
Were you marked by the memories of your mother telling you the stories of that bombardment and the kind of war years there?
No, she didn't talk much about it, but I do remember one of my first memories is she took me out of bed together with my older brother and carried us up the slope behind the house, and she said, "Children, you have to see this. The city of Rosenheim is burning." And Rosenheim is something like 35 kilometers away. The entire sky outside the valley was orange and red. So I remember this color at the sky, and I marveled at it. And it's one of those indelible first images of childhood. Mm-hmm. But the war didn't come closer than that, because this mountain valley was simply too insignificant for any attack. It became significant because when Germany was occupied from all sides, the Russians in the east, French, British, American troops from the north and from the west, and converging, Germany shrank, and the last pocket, the very last pocket not occupied, was around Sachrang and Kaiser Mountains in Tyrol. And the last werewolves and resistance and SS officers fled, converged there, hid their weapons under the hay in the barns or in the forest, and then would flee into the mountains. So, and because of that, the war or troops started to converge in Sachrang, and Americans finally arrived in Sachrang and took it.
Did your experience as a young child in a war zone like that mark you in certain ways in terms of politics or pacifism?
No, not politics. It was just very beautiful to grow up like that. We enjoyed it as children not to have any fathers around. No one who would tell us what to do and how to do things, and we became self-reliant very early on. We were the ones, the boys were the ones who tried to re-educate the mother. It's not her attempts were all a failure, but we tried to re-educate her and had certain successes. And of course, later in Munich, when I was 11, moving to Munich, still a lot of ruins, and it was very beautiful to grow up in ruins. And those who grew up in 1946, 1947, 1948, so in the real rubble of the ruins, bombed out cities, for them it was paradise, was the best childhood you could find.
Some of those images could just come into my mind now, kind of these dystopian images in films like Lessons of Darkness, and some of your, what you call science fiction too, seem to be perhaps related to that kind of landscape.
Yeah, not really. Of course, there is a certain fascination about big fires and the sky illuminated by fires. The situation I found in Kuwait, but the Kuwait film Lessons of Darkness, of course, transports it into the area of science fiction and transports it completely away from politics or from the presence of a war. There's a fictitious sort of war going on, and the entire film is instantly elevated. I should remind you, at the very beginning of the film, there's a written quote by Blaise Pascal, the French philosopher, and it says, the collapse of the stellar universe will occur like creation in grandiose splendor. And it's a very beautiful sentence, which actually was not by Pascal, but by me. And I wrote Blaise Pascal under it. frankly speaking, he couldn't have said it better anyway. So, but why do I do this? Of course, if you're an accountant, you would say, yes, this is a distortion, this is a lie. Yes, I accept it easily. But it somehow introduces a cosmic component of what you are going to see. And it elevates the audience. Before you see the first image, it elevates the audience into a very high level. You step into it at a very high level, and I never allow you to step down from there. So, and that's what I call a certain ecstasy of truth, something that illuminates you. And Blaise Pascal has something illuminating. The quote by Blaise Pascal, which is a fabricated one, serves for the purpose of illumination. It is not a lie. It's a lie for the accountants. For me, it is an intensifying of a truth, intensification.
Yeah, you use epigram or epitaphs or quotes at the ends of films as well. It's kind of meditation sometimes, for which we are, when we leave the cinema, we sort of carry forth with an image of a
land. What comes to mind? Land of Silence and Darkness. A woman who is deaf and blind at the same time. And it's sometimes there are some written captions in between, as if it were statements by the leading character, by this woman, who has a great depth and great dignity, and is a real enormous person. And sometimes I have some quotes, and at the end but they're all made-up quotes, but they are, in a way, quotes that she could have said and give an essence of her existence. At the end, a man who has become deaf and blind, a farmer, and was neglected by his family, had lived with the cows in the stable for 6 or 7 or 8 years, and is now in a home for old age people in Bavaria. And he sits with his mother at a bench, and all of a sudden he feels uncomfortable and breaks away from his mother and the visitor, Finny Straubinger, the woman who was the central figure in the film. He breaks away, and the camera, of course, follows him and sees him, and he runs into some branches of an apple tree, and he touches the branches and finds the stem, the tree trunk, and touches it and tries to figure out the branches. And it's a moment of such great depth and very hard to describe. And then all of a sudden Finny Straubinger, who doesn't know what is going on, is standing up, and she's standing and waiting because nobody is at her reach anymore. And then a caption appears: "If a world war would break out now, I wouldn't even notice." And it's a text that I wrote, but it could have been hers. It could have been hers, or actually not could have been hers, it is her text. In an intensified, essential way, that is what Finny Straubinger at that moment was. And she was one of those, even though that was one of my very early films in the early 70s. I tapped it in a tactile alphabet into her fingertips and read the text to her, and she said, "This is beautiful, this is what you should keep in the film." She immediately understood it was her, not me.
I've managed over, I guess, 25 years to watch a lot of your films and retrospectives, and all of them are just so kind of memorable, and everybody's really looking forward to seeing the next Herzog. Maybe we'll just pursue a little bit of this ecstatic truth idea, because I think it's a major contribution to the way we sort of divide up the world, or the documentary world, in terms of the kind of realists and the verite people, the cinema verite movement, which really began in the late 50s and early 60s in North America.
It's the answer of the 60s, and there are such losers. I mean, it's such a...
You were very famous for what was called the Minnesota Declaration, I think from the Walker Arts Center there about 7 years ago, talking about cinema verite. I don't know. Were you on the panel with Frederick Wiseman?
No, well, I do battle with him once in a while, and we enjoy it both because it's always in good style. Now, what can I say?
I could maybe read a few of the principles and maybe you react to them. It's Truth and Fact in Documentary Cinema, really. Lessons of Darkness at the Minnesota Declaration. By dint of declaration, the so-called cinema verite is devoid of verite. It reaches a merely superficial truth, the truth of accountants. Cinema verite confounds fact and truth, and thus plows only stones. And yet facts sometimes have a strange and bizarre power that makes their inherent truths seem unbelievable. Tourism is a sin, and travel on foot is a virtue. That's like principle number 7.
Yes, but what does it have to do in a manifesto about cinema?
Yes,
but it's or if you could read the last one, it's a very beautiful sentence.
It is.
Also, yeah.
That's number 12.
Number 12. Yeah.
Yes, the gospel is a 12-step program, really, for documentary people to.
Well, it's only half a page long, and it has its humor.
Life in the oceans must be sheer hell, a vast, merciless hell of permanent. I wish I could do this with your accent, but a vast, merciless hell of permanent and immediate danger. So much of a hell that during evolution, some species, including man, crawled, fled unto some small continents of solid land, where the lessons of darkness continue.
Yeah, well, that's. I ask you to read it because it's one of the questions I'm posing to a scientist in Encounters at the End of the World.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think there's also a beautiful one. We should be grateful that the universe knows no smiles.
These are very Zen koans, as we call them. But the essential one, I think, really is that there are deeper strata of truth in cinema.
Yeah.
And there is such a thing as a poetic, ecstatic truth. It is mysterious and elusive and can reached only through fabrication and imagination and stylization.
Yes, sure. That's in essence, and it's not just it is not just a question of documentary filmmaking. It pertains to filmmaking in general. It has been a principle of search and procedure throughout all my other films. So it's not just Walker Art Center where I had a retrospective and I didn't want to come with empty hands. So I was very angry and had been in Italy shortly before that and jet lagged twice over from going from Los Angeles to Sicily, and then a few days there, and then from Sicily to Minnesota. And jet lag had accumulated, and I was awake at night, and I switched on Italian TV, and there was this insipid sort of documentary on, and I thought this was all wrong, and there was something not right. And it's not only Italian TV; it's worldwide the same thing that I cannot take any longer. And then all of a sudden at 3 in the morning when I was wide awake, I turn on and there's a hardcore porno. I mean, you didn't even have to pay extra fee at the hotel. It was just on TV, a porno. And I had the feeling, well, this is at least the naked truth. It's a movie.
A real documentary.
No, not a documentary, a real movie.
A movie.
A movie like karate films or like Fred Astaire. I love these films because they're just movies, period. They move. And there's
move, yeah.
There's a certain I don't know whether we should call it truth, but there was something which was more appealing to me than in the documentaries that you see day in, day out. And I had the feeling I should write down what I thought. So in 15 minutes I wrote this half page and brought it to Minneapolis as some sort of a present to the audience. And I asked the audience, Minnesota Declaration, since it was at the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis, I said, to the audience. I never had a real majority for my films. Many of my films were put down by reviewers and audience didn't come, but the house was pretty full, and I read the manifesto to them, and then I asked for acclamation, whether we should call it the Minnesota Declaration, and I had an acclamation of everyone. So that was the first unanimous sort of vote that I ever got. Because there was not one in the audience who raised the hand when I asked who is against that. So they kept quiet, possibly intimidated.
I think they're all expatriate Dutch people living in Minneapolis, no? I don't know. European consensus is there.
And Scandinavians.
They
Yeah,
all
mostly
agree with
Norwegians, Swedes, yeah.
Will you be prepared to create a kind of Amsterdam manifesto? Or what's on your mind these days?
No manifestos. It shouldn't be. It shouldn't get out of hand. You do that once, and that's it. But thanks God, the manifesto is not one of those very dry theoretical postulates of behavior. So they're always awful when you read manifestos. So it has a certain amount of humor in it.
I'm wondering, in terms of the cinematic mentors, do you have kind of filmmakers when you were growing up that really had an influence you, or particular films?
No, not really, because the first time I ever knew that cinema existed was when I was 11. In school in Sachrang, a traveling projectionist came by and showed 2 films. So until then, I didn't even know that cinema existed. So it was a novelty, and I didn't like the 2 films that were shown at that time. And later in Munich, yes, I saw films Zorro and Dr. Fu Manchu and things like that. And no real mentors in the world of cinema, since I was one of those, and many of my generation in Germany were in the same situation. But I, in particular, had to invent cinema as if it was as if it were my own invention. And of course, I never looked out for a screenwriter. I would write my screenplays. I never looked out for a production company because I would produce my own films. We started our own distribution company. We started literally everything ourselves. I remember I sent, age 20 or so, I sent about 2.5 kilos of texts to the best publishing house in Germany and wrote some sort of a real bozo letter with it. My name is so-and-so, and I want you to publish it all, exclamation mark. And of course, 3 weeks later, I got it all back and with one of these standard letters of denial. But I anticipated it already. And a day later, I founded my own publishing house. And I published 3 books, 3 books in this Skellig edition. And I knew something would come out of it. And of course, now one of the most prestigious publishing houses has taken Skellig edition and has continued it with other books. And so I'm one of those very self-made persons who would actually do whatever is necessary myself.
You were even doing the sound on Encounters.
It's not the first time. Yes, I've done sometimes sound on my films, sometimes also cinematography, although I have never outed me, with one exception recently. It's the film I made in India and Tibet called Wheel of Time, yes, because the entire part in Tibet I shot myself. There was no cinematographer. But I've done cinematography in other films before, partially cinematography, and sometimes invented names or took names of well-known cinematographers, asked them, can I use your name? and I would put it in there. So
you're really kind of close with your brother. You, I guess, formed a company.
The younger,
the younger
yes,
brother.
Yeah.
You've formed a company together, and
No, I formed it alone, but he's running it all. Yeah.
And you're bicontinental in a certain sense too. an international empire of 2?
No, that's too far-fetched. We are too small for that, and that's not that significant. But we have managed to remain self-reliant. And I do live in Los Angeles now, but it's a pleasant way to exist there because Hollywood does not need me, and I do not need Hollywood either. So it's a very easy way to deal with Los Angeles, and I like Los Angeles a lot. Has a lot of cultural substance that is not visible yet clearly for any tourist. You do not see it. It only looks ugly, and it looks vulgar, and it looks crazed with stretch limos and the parties and all these things and the glitz and glamour of Hollywood. But behind it, under it, beneath it, there's a great cultural intensity which I like a lot. And I keep stumbling into films like Grizzly Man from one minute to the next. Never any plan to do the film, and from 1 minute to the next I do the film because in a meeting with a producer who had been very friendly and helped me along with finding a network executive from Japan for The White Diamond. And I paid him a visit, just a courtesy visit, and when I left, I couldn't find my car keys. And I was looking down, and there was this table full of papers and messy, half-eaten lunch packages and FedExes, and I couldn't see my keys, and he thought I spotted something in particular and pushes an article over to me and said, "Read this, we are doing a very interesting project." So, and I left, and normally I do not read these things, but I read it, and I was instantly back. And I said to him, no, I asked, who is directing the film, after some other questions, who is directing the film? And he said, I'm kind of directing the film, but he said, kind of. Kind of, and I knew he was not so sure. And with my thickest accent, I would say, no, I will direct this movie now. And I started right away, and it was done very quickly.
That film is, I guess, played here last year, and it's returning again. This year, the audience really just loved that film. It's one of your more popular films internationally in terms of distribution and in cinemas. Maybe you can take us a bit through that.
We have to be cautious. Of course, it in a way it is my film, but it is also Timothy Treadwell's film, who provided half the footage of the film for this footage that he shot himself with a camera mostly turned on himself. So, but of course he was already eaten and killed by a bear together with his girlfriend, and that was already 10 months before I started to make the film on him.
How much material, his material, did you have to go through?
Well, I didn't go through all of it. There was about 100 hours, but I had 9 days to edit the film. So for watching 100 hours would be about 10, 11, 12 days of non-stop viewing the footage. So I engaged 4 or 5 young, very intelligent, alert people who sifted through it. Each one of them got something like 20 hours. And they had very clear instructions, and quite often I would walk by and look what they were doing and what they were sifting out. And they overlooked a few very important things, so I had to keep an eye on them. But all in all, I did not see more than, let's say, 12 or 15 hours of Treadwell's footage. And of course, I know that something like 85% or so of his footage was always very repetitious, fluffy bear cubs, idyllic nature, and him proclaiming to be the protector of these bears now. So, and not much of that is in my film.
Well, the hubris of that is a kind of the thing that's powerful in that film is the moment where you're listening to the attack of the bears, I guess, with the The mother, I guess it is.
Yeah, it was what happened is when Treadwell was finally attacked and killed, his girl, it must have been his girlfriend who, still inside the tent, switched on the camera and screaming starts so loud and so intense outside that she apparently dropped the camera without removing the lens cap. And what you can hear then, a part of rain, heavy rain on the tent, she apparently grabbed a frying pan and hit the bear over the head with it. You hear the clear banging of something metallic. And later at the site where the bear had killed both of them and eaten both of them, a frying pan was found. And it got so intense and so horrifying, and it actually covers the last remaining 6 minutes of the tape. And then the tape stops because the hour was full then. And it was an immediate decision. This is not going to end up in the film. It has to be kept out. There is such a thing as, how shall I say, the privacy and the dignity of a individual's death, which should be respected. And I had to address it in a way because the distributor and the network, the TV network, Discovery, and everybody pushed me, you have to address it, this tape, because it was very well known in the public that it existed. Mm-hmm. And in some court hearings of the coroner, it was mentioned already and was some sort of an official document, but under seal. So I said, yes, I'm going to address it, but I do not want to film myself listening to it. I will film myself from behind. And the woman who had lived with Treadwell for 20 years, or knew him for 20 years, sits opposite of me, and she has inherited all the estate of Treadwell. And she, trying to read my reactions from my face, was a more interesting thing, so I filmed it like this. But you should not think that there's much thinking about it or much conceptualizing or so. There's, in a film like this, not one moment time to conceptualize or to make a program or to think much. You just do it quickly as it is. And as I said, the film was edited in 9 days. Mm. And in these 9 days, I wrote the commentary and I recorded the commentary and did a pre-mix without the final music yet. So you go through editing without having any chance to be distracted by conceptualizing.
In most of your films, do you do a lot of kind of research before you go on, or are you just really intuitive in the kind of moment all the time?
No, not intuitive. I'm not so much for filmmakers who pretend to be always intuitive. And in the same way, I do not like people who meditate, who come around and meditate all the time. I prefer people who are informed, do some coherent thinking and come up with a coherent argument. That's what I like. So, how shall I say? Yes, of course, when I have this material and when I'm out there, I make my choices and I make coherent choices, but based on information that I have gathered throughout my life and a worldview and a certain vision what to do with a film. In this way, conceptual things come very easily to me, and that's why I can work so fast. And in Encounters at the End of the World, yes, there is no way to prepare yourself, because I had no idea whom I was going to meet. I had no idea what sort of film I would make. I had no idea what sort of projects there were. Well, I had a brochure with 350 or so scientific projects going on, but they are so highly technically described that you have no idea, only with a basic notion, this is a geophysical project, this is a climate project, this is a project on penguins, this is a project on neutrino detection. And that was about that, and kind of frightening to come to a place without really knowing what to do, and I knew I had to bring back a film. That was the only scary thing.
I think we can go to a clip of from Encounters of who wish.
I have to say that. Is it the penguin sequence?
Yeah.
I made clear I would not come up with another film about fluffy penguins. So and I swore to God I would not even shoot one single penguin. But then I got carried away, and I did a little penguin sequence of 4 or 5 minutes anyway. So.
And I think we promised you we wouldn't show the penguins too. I think we could be ready. We're way up in that booth there with an HD. I hope it's ready.
Left McMurdo for the penguin colony at Cape Royds. Everyone spoke about penguins. However, the questions I had were not so easily answered. I was referred to a penguin expert out there who had studied them for almost 20 years. I was told that he was a taciturn man who in his solitude was not much into conversation with humans anymore. But Dr. Ainley gave his best effort.
Well, here we are at Cape Royds. This is 2006, and it's just about the 100th anniversary of the first penguin study that was ever done, which was done here at Cape Royds by a person that was part of the Shackleton expedition. They're all had a good winter and they're very fat. They've claimed their territories and eggs have been laid, females have left, and now there's just males that are sitting on eggs, using their fat reserves and waiting for females to return to relieve them and then go to sea.
I tried to keep the conversation going. Dr. Ainley, I read somewhere that there are gay penguins. What are your observations?
I've never...
Well, strange sexual behavior. Can you talk about
Yeah, it's, there's been relationships where there's one female and 2 males, and the female lays the egg and her eggs, and the males and the female trade off over the season. There are misidentities initially of the sex of penguins. Somebody recently described what they call prostitution, where a female who is out collecting rocks for her nest, and of course some penguins are, the only way they collect rocks is to steal them from others, so in order to do that they have to be very submissive in order to get close to a male who's maybe advertising for a mate, and so she'll come in next, sit in his nest, and sometimes he'll copulate, but eventually, really her idea is to get a rock, and so she, as soon as she can, she escapes with the rock.
Dr. Ainley, is there such thing as insanity among penguins? I try to avoid a definition of insanity or derangement. I don't mean that a penguin might believe he or she is Lenin or Napoleon Bonaparte, but could they just go crazy because they've had enough of their colony?
Well, I've never seen a penguin bashing its head against a rock. They do get disoriented. They end up in places they shouldn't be, long way from the ocean,
These penguins are all heading to the open water to the right. But one of them caught our eye, the one in the center. He would neither go towards the feeding grounds at the edge of the ice, nor return to the colony. Shortly afterwards, we saw him heading straight towards the mountains, some 70 kilometers away. Dr. Ainley explained that even if he caught him and brought him back to the colony, he would immediately head right back for the mountains. But why? One of these disoriented or deranged penguins showed up at the New Harbor diving camp, already some 80 kilometers away from where it should be. The rules for the humans are: do not disturb or hold up the penguin. Stand still and let him go on his way. And here he's heading off into the interior of the vast continent. With 5,000 kilometers ahead of him, he's heading towards certain death.
That's life in a microcosm there.
Yeah, the deranged penguins. I'm really fascinated about the idea whether there's such a thing like insanity in the world of mammals. Does it exist? I do believe, without going into a definition of insanity, I do believe that there is such a thing going on in the world of animals. Or let's say higher order mammals.
Like humans, on a mass
Yes,
level?
yeah. It is, yes, sure.
You think, I see Encounters as a kind of beautiful ecological film, certain warning in a more subtle way than the Davis Guggenheim film he made with Al Gore in the PowerPoint film. This has your kind of ecological overlay on it.
Yeah, but we should be careful. I'm not very much into questions of ecology in this film. There are other films who do that better and have made their point very clearly. I think the film makes or there's some sort of a subtext in the film that our presence on this planet is not sustainable. And not only for ecological reasons. There might be many other possibilities to kill us off. And of course, life on this planet has always been a chain of cataclysmic events, of catastrophes. We have seen the demise of trilobites, and we have seen hundreds of millions of years later the sudden demise of dinosaurs. Next one will be the sudden demise of the human race. And it's not just a question of global warming. My first candidate would be microbes who are out there to kill us off, and we probably have not much defense against it. And there's one very interesting thing, because the scientists talk about it very openly within the community, but not to the public yet, because it's still some sort of a complete and utter taboo, racism, but the positive aspect of racism, that you have some sort of Inuit communities or communities of Bushmen in Namibia or Mongolians or whatever. All the races probably are a protective device to maintain the survival of the human race on this planet. Because some of them may have a resistance against something that will kill off everyone else. So all of a sudden, racism or races have a very, very peculiar and specific value. Of course, it is awful to talk about it in public, and I have certain hesitation to even mention it, but it is an all-pervading sort of discussion in Antarctica among scientists, and that's a very interesting new version of hearing them talk about races, about human races, as a great asset of the human species.
Many of your films seem to be about this. If you take the fiction films too, and Agara and Kinski's versions and visions in the jungles of South America, or trying to take a giant paddleboat steamer up a mountain and taming nature in a certain way. You think this is kind of folly in the kind of human condition?
I think it's not taming nature. So I've never been on this trip of thinking like conquering the summit of a mountain and taming nature. I think it's not in the subject of Fitzcarraldo. However, it is transporting culture into a region where you normally would not see it easily. What does great opera have to do in the jungle? The billionaires, the caoutchouc billionaires, the rubber billionaires of 100 years ago had a clear sense of that. Yes, the jungle was a place of fever dreams. That was a place of great opera, and they built this opera house, the famous opera Teatro Amazonas in Manaus, in the middle of the jungle, and they brought in the greatest singers from Europe to perform for one night in this theater, and it still exists. It's fairly well restored now. And again, I think even for the rubber billionaires of that time, it was not a question of taming nature. It was something else, as if nature of the jungle and the fever dreams of the jungle were in alliance with the dreams and fever dreams of great opera.
I'm wondering, you live in a kind of dream world, or your cinema is about dream, I guess. I'm wondering what your fevered dreams are generally. What were you dreaming about last night?
I do not dream. I belong to those who prove all the shrinks idiots who claim that every human being dreams so and so much time each night. I do not. I'm the proof that they're all wrong. Because you can wake me up at any time at night, and I feel the deficit. Well, I do not dream, and I have not dreamt again. So no, I do not dream. Of course, I do dream. For example, when I travel on foot, when I walk long distances, I walk through entire novels in one single day, plus at least one great soccer game, which is always Maracanã Stadium. And the most perfect players you would ever find are playing in this game. And I'm one of the players, even though I never get the ball, but it doesn't matter. I'm in it somehow.
In what position then?
Well, I'm somehow midfield, but even though in normal soccer I would play center forward, because I would be the one to score the goals for my team. I have to admit, it's under 5th division or so that I played, and everyone in my team was faster. Everyone was, or almost everyone, technically better, but I was the one who would normally score the goals because I could read the game better than others. I would understand what would happen next. So that was my value as a player. Otherwise, I was lousy.
You have a kind of mathematical, analytical mind?
No, it's something that you cannot describe, because if you start to analyze and the ball is right flying at you, and if you start to analyze, you will not hit the ball. So it has to do with relation within space. How do you understand movement, and how do you understand the dynamics of the ball? It's not just the two teams. The ball itself has its own strange quirks and life and caprices. and you have to be able to read it. And some of the players that I admire most were those who could read the game better than others. The greatest of all was an Italian, Baresi. At that time, at his time, some 20 years ago or 15 years ago, libero. He would read the game in such a way that all of a sudden a counter-attack would come. He finds himself all alone against 4 attacking players, and he would stop them. Just phenomenal, because he would understand what would come next.
Is that a kind of procedure and process you apply to being on location and on set that you have? Are you sort of reading and anticipating? And
yes, an understanding for spaces, and that's first of all a physical understanding, but it's also an understanding that I have in terms of, let's say, the physicality of an entire audience. And of course, in a theater, you are sitting at the far left corner of the house, and somebody is sitting up there. So there are different angles at looking at the screen, and yet a movement that you do with a camera, with your actors, has to play out for everyone. It has to be. It has to transport the same physical understanding of the space. So. You have to be very much in the position of an audience out there. Or, for example, in Ageri, The Wrath of God, it's very, very precise understanding for the audience. At the beginning of the film, everybody knows, these Spanish adventurers in search of El Dorado are all moving in a certain direction. They're searching a place, and you always see them moving from left to right. Then later they travel on rafts, and imperceptibly, very imperceptibly, the sense of direction is getting lost. How it is getting lost is a very complex thing, which has not only to do with movement on screen, it also has to do with strange fever dreams, strange dialogues, strange incidents where all of a sudden the impossible is possible. All of a sudden you see a Spanish brigantine suspended in a treetop, 35, 40 meters up in a treetop with a sail and a canoe dangling from its end. And because all of the sequence of events leading you in there, the incomprehensible becomes very, very normal and becomes a norm. However, at the same time, the sense of direction is getting lost. And at the end, the camera is actually circling around the raft, and you have the feeling the raft itself is circling and standing still at one spot and spinning and spinning and spinning. And now there is no direction possible anymore. And to establish something like this is a very, very, very well-crafted sort of event throughout the whole movie. And you do not establish it when you edit a film. You establish it when you are shooting. And you do not establish the rhythm of a film during editing. You have to establish it during shooting. It's a common mistake that is being made, and even by very, very accomplished filmmakers. You see what sort of mistakes they make and how they squeeze their material and butcher their material into a certain form of metron, and distort the very rhythm of the images that they shot. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things where I make the real distinction between real accomplished filmmaking and in a way a dilettante approach to the profession.
That brings to mind your relationships with the cinematographers in your filmmaking, various fantastic ones. I also remember a scene in La Soufrière, and as a volcano is about to explode, you're forcing your cameraman, Ed Lockman, I think it is.
One of them, yeah. One of the two, yes.
One of the two, up to the edge of the volcano within a few meters of these deadly sulfurs coming out, which could kill you in a second. You must have
toxic, but
you must have great trust with your.
But I have to interfere right away because you said I forced my cameraman Ed Luckman. I did not force him. Ed actually is one of the more timid sort of persons, and I flew into Guadeloupe. From 1 minute to the next, I decided I would do it. I called Schmidt-Reitwein, and he came right away. Ed Luckman came from New York. And now we had to decide, what do we do? Are we going to film on top of this volcano, which was about to explode? And it was going to be a very serious explosion. We knew it was something like Mount St. Helens or 5, 6, 7, 8 atomic bombs, Hiroshima size. So that's what the geologists knew would happen if there was an eruption. First an explosion and then eruption. Everyone had to decide himself whether we would do it or not. So I said, give me your camera, I'm going. We had bypassed roadblocks, and on a jungle path we were past these roadblocks, and then we were 25 kilometers away from the mountain. And you could see it, and we had very, very serious tremors all night long, and shock waves up to 5.6 or 7 on the Richter scale. So it's not a joke. It's not a joke. And I asked Schmidt-Reitwein, give me your camera, I do it. He said, no, I'm hanging on to my camera, I will come along. So I said to Ed, how about you? You have to decide yourself. And his glasses had fogged over, and he kept wiping his glasses. And then he said to me, Werner, can I take a leak? So I said, yeah, Ed, go out of the car. And he went to the jungle, came back, and then he said, I have one question. I have one question to you. What happens if the mountain explodes? And I said to him, Edward, we will be airborne. And that was all I could tell him. And then he said, I'm with you. And he grabbed his camera, and so we did it. So, there's never anyone was forced to do anything. That would be impermissible. And besides, it was worthwhile. Sometimes you have to ask yourself how much is your own life worth. So I mean, it's kind of insignificant whether whether you perish on a volcano or in your bed. It doesn't really matter. The universe doesn't care.
Well, we care about you and your films. I think maybe what we'll do for the last maybe 45 minutes or so is really open it up. I'm sorry to have monopolized your time, but there will also be some time after the screenings of each of the films today for ample discussion. But we have about a half an hour or so for people who have questions. We have, and for those who are in the balcony, there are some mic stands here too. You could come and stand before them. But we have some roving microphones. Where are they? A couple of them. They're in the back. So if I can see your hands, we can take questions. Werner will take questions on anything, and on any of his films. Yeah, we can get the lights a bit there. Here's one up in the front here.
Now I see.
We're going to have to run the mics around, and you'll be patient, and we'll moderate questions if they get.
There's also someone.
I wonder, after the Dieter documentary, why you decided to make the movie Rescue Dawn.
Well, Little Dieter Needs to Fly is also a movie. I wouldn't follow your distinction. It's two movies. And but I understand the nature of your question. In a way, Rescue Dawn was always the first and only film we wanted to make. Yes, it's a story, a real big movie, epic story, and a central character, larger than life, so it needs a big theater and a big screen, Rescue Dawn. But as there was available money at the time to do a documentary in quotes, because it's a feature film in disguise anyway, we made Little Dieter Needs to Fly. And the story, there was always the feeling of something incomplete. Dieter, when he saw the film with me for the first time after the lights go up, he turned to me and he said, Werner, this is unfinished business. Yes, I knew. And I said, it's your fault as well, because sometimes in the film he would hardly ever refer to what was really going on in the prison camp. He dismisses things in one single sentence that says there were some misunderstandings and differences of opinion among us, the prisoners, until we overheard the guards planning to kill us. Then we were all in the same boat. Fact is, and after I filmed this, and a few days later, Dieter tells me details about life among prisoners, and they spent 2 years already in medieval footblocks, in being cross-handcuffed to each other and having diarrhea, I mean the worst kind of diarrhea, and sitting there all night like this. They hated each other to such an extent that sometimes they would have strangled each other if they had had a hand free, and they couldn't. So, and I said, yes, sure, Dieter, that's all for the feature film, and that your childhood and your later years, they all will not factor in Rescue Dawn. There will be a big story out there, and the films will complement each other. So it's 2 movies. It's not just one movie in the documentary. It's 2 movies. Both are fine films, and both deserve to be in existence. So.
I think Rescue Dawn played on this screen earlier.
Ah, yeah, okay.
Mm-hmm. There's one
yes,
up here
yeah.
and one there. This one first.
Yeah.
Sorry to make you
We
run.
should follow a little
we
bit
need a
the
second
microphone,
microphone
yeah.
if that's possible.
I'm sorry, I do not see it
And
so well there.
So at the beginning of your conversation, you said language and culture could have a function in the crisis between the two Germanies.
No, culture and the common language is a common element. Our culture is a thing that holds it together.
Oh, okay. Also, it's holding it together. I thought you meant it could be an answer to, or it could help solve the crisis. Okay, but then I got that wrong. Why do you think there is craziness among mammals? Because you said that at the end. Why do you think that?
Yeah. Well, I must say I do not want to go into the business of definition. I would not be capable to give you a definition, and probably psychiatrists would have a hard time to really define what constitutes insanity, what constitutes paranoia, what constitutes neurosis. There is no very clear definition yet. However, I have seen a bear by the way, in Thailand, a bear which was clearly and definitely insane, mad, stark mad, insane. What actually happens is that in Laos and in some northern provinces of Thailand, they catch these bears. One of them you see in Little Dieter Needs to Fly. And there are clients who pay an enormous amount of money to eat the bear alive, so to speak. What they do is a bear is caught alive, is put into some sort of a flat cage and squeezed in it. And then they cook one paw of the bear while the bear is alive and eat the paw in a restaurant or so. And the bear is still alive. And I saw a bear which had 3 intact paws and one was eaten away in a restaurant. And the bear was stark mad, raving mad, and rapidly mad, totally and utterly insane, in my opinion. In anger and pain, something had snapped inside of this bear. And I do believe that there is such a thing like insanity, although I do not have a clear argument. I have no argument and I have no knowledge. However, the question is very fascinating for me, because mammals, with the exception of human beings, are much more determined in their way of behavior. And yet I have the feeling that there are forms of derangement among animals. And very fascinating for me to find out and speak to biologists and speak to experts and find out, is there such a thing as insanity or derangement among animals? And that was one of the questions that really fascinated me about penguins, because apparently there is a form of derangement among some of the penguins.
I would really love to know at what stage you start thinking about music. For example, in the encounters, I think music is such a very important, almost not part of the film, but in it.
In Encounters at the End of the World, the last music in the film was there before I started to make the film. And it is a church choir from Russian Orthodox church service, but in this case with a lead singer, a so-called basso profundo, a very low-pitched bass, 1 octave lower in pitch than every other bass voice, a very profoundly. And I had the feeling that had to be the music for the end of the film, and it somehow fell into place once I was down in Antarctica, and I had no clear idea what could I do there and what would I film. And strangely enough, at that time I had gone back into reading Latin and ancient Greek, which was forced upon me in school, and I refreshed it. And I very important in this film, strangely enough, was the Georgics by Virgil, Georgica, about land life, about agriculture. The very beautiful thing about this is, number one, of course, you immediately sense he speaks with great, in his poem, he speaks with great authority about land life, about agriculture, because he grew up near Mantova on a farm. And it's just wonderful how he speaks about beekeeping and about a storm coming and how the ravens are behaving and how to plant a vineyard and things like this. But ultimately what makes it so beautiful is just naming the world as it is, with all its glory and all its magnificence. He just names it. And that was my attitude when I shot Encounters at the End of the World. If you don't know what to do, just name the glory, film it and name it. And the music at the end, the basso profundo, this lead voice which sings on one pitch of voice, names one saint after the other, saint after saint after saint after saint, not explaining the story of the saint, just naming them and the glory of the saint. And in a way it fell, even though it was a pre-arranged in my mind about the music, what I saw and what I found in Antarctica fell in place with the music. So, but quite often I have worked with Popol Vuh, a group, basically one person, Florian Fricke, who unfortunately died, for having composed music and in very close contact with a composer. Sometimes I have worked in 2 films, The White Diamond and The Wild Blue Yonder. The music was done by a Dutch genius cello player, Ernst Reisiger, who lives here in town. One of the greatest musicians that you ever can find on this planet. And he plays cello. He's an avant-garde cello composer and player. And together with 5 Sardinians who sing these very ancient, almost prehistoric sort of songs, and Senegalese singer, Mola Silla, who also lives here in town, who sings along in Wolof, in his native language. The music was created in a session in Paris in 2 days for 2 films actually, was created before any footage was ever shot. On the set of The White Diamond, the cinematographer, he asked me about conceptual things. I said, I do not discuss conceptual things, just look at the waterfall and look at the 1.5 million swifts coming down and going behind this curtain of water. And he still didn't know exactly what, and I put some earphones on him and I said, listen to the music, that's what you are going to film now. And he listened, and somehow no further discussion, he understood what I meant. So sometimes the music is even there before the film is being created. It's such an important part of what I'm doing. And I never waste more than 5 minutes in placing a music. I knew certain things under the water. Yes, there will be another Russian Orthodox or maybe Bulgarian in one case, church choir, and I have 2 candidates. I place one and I say, that's it. And the editor says, well, let's try the other one. I said, don't even try it. We take this. So it goes so fast. No thinking about it, no fiddling around. I work very, very quickly, and I know I'm good at that.
You must have an amazing iPod collection of music.
No, I do not have an iPod. I listen. How do I listen? Yeah, on the radio sometimes, and I listen to CDs. But I do not go to concerts, and I do not attend opera performances. I've never been a spectator in opera, although I stage operas. But I do not watch operas as a spectator.
You've used contemporary music too, in Fatima Morgana, people like Leonard Cohen.
Yeah, sure. All, of course, somehow at the time, I would say expropriated. I just took it, and today I maintain there are contracts which we cannot find anymore. Nor can the other side find it.
In the middle there.
Hello, I wondered how the move towards sustainability, also in filmmaking, has affected your own sustainability. Thank you.
Can you be a little bit more explicit what move in filmmaking?
Well, I understand that there is a move in filmmaking towards sustainability that we see in all aspects of the society today. So I wondered how that has impacted you, perhaps.
I do not see so many films that I can maintain, or I can agree with you that I've seen this kind of move about sustainability of human life on this planet. I have not seen any other film. You may refer to Al Gore's film, but that's about climate change and something has to be done, but he doesn't speak about the extinction of the human race on this planet. You only hear about it in science fiction films, that some bad guys from outer space, some aliens are coming and they try to destroy civilization on this planet. I think they are not going to arrive. There will be other causes that will wipe us out. But maybe there's a misunderstanding. I have the feeling you wanted to know something else.
Yeah, well, the thing is, we understand what's going on the planet today, or more of us are understanding this. And
what is going on this planet? Can you be more specific? Because I do not know what you are referring to. Are you speaking about...
Well, that we in the West, with a certain percentage of the world's population, are using much more of the world's resources, and the world is unbalanced. We are over-consuming, over-polluting, and we have caused this climate change problem. The thing is, in every aspect of the society today, people are trying to do more with less, to talk about Buckminster Fuller's old slogan, and we're trying to change our lifestyle so that we do bring a balance into it. I'll mention to you, maybe you know Zagreb Film. This is a film studio in old Yugoslavia that created the animated style called reduced animation. They used, let's say, a small percentage of the number of film cells that, for example, a film studio like Walt Disney was using at the time. They used less film cells because they had less resources available. Okay, so I'm trying to ask you, in your own filmmaking, are you aware? You are aware of what's going on, and has that come into your filmmaking in any way? Perhaps even you're shooting less film, or I'm just trying to find out where in filmmaking these principles are coming into practice or not yet. Thank you.
I understand more the nature of your question, because you are reducing it basically to using too many resources, certain parts of this population of this planet, and climate change. But of course, when we speak about sustainability of life on this planet, it could be many other reasons that will cause our extinction, like, for example, microbes, or like a massive volcanic eruption, or some other things that might happen easily. So there's a lot of other scenarios out there. However, you are, of course, absolutely correct in talking about and addressing as one of the major problems of our planet the waste of resources in the consumer society. But it's very much a cultural attitude as well. And we should not wait. We should not wait for the government to pass legislation. You cannot legislate stupidity. You cannot legislate certain things. You have to do it. Every single person who has an idea what's going on should go into action. For example, since 12 years, I drive my car only 10% of what I used to drive it. So, and that makes a tiny, tiny difference, and if everybody would do it, it would make a perceptible difference. As a subject in my films, I have not really addressed it in a small way, yes, in Encounters at the End of the World, but in maybe Lessons of Darkness, but it's more like a science fiction film. Yes, sure, it is a big problem and should be addressed in movies and is being addressed. I'm not so much one who sees film as the right tool to do the right thing. I drive my car only 10% of what I used to do, and I'm not really much into a consumer attitude throughout my life. And when you speak about, wasting more or less raw stock for a film, it was always dictated by absence of enough funds to make a film. So I made films with very, very small amounts of raw stock. And I've got accustomed to it, and I feel safe and all right with it.
And I guess with smaller crews in the kind of European rather than Hollywood style. There's a microphone up here. Needed. Yeah,
smaller crews, of course. Antarctic film was done with 2 men, 1 cinematographer, and I did the sound. So not much traveling, not much resources wasted down in Antarctica.
Hello. You already talked a little bit about it, but I would like to hear more about your work with your cinematographers, like what qualities do you look for in a cinematographer, and what do you feel is the role of the cinematographer when you make your films?
You are a filmmaker. Yes, yeah, sure. I have no general rule. You have to know what sort of qualities you are trying to find in a cinematographer. The man with whom I'm working for the last 10 or 12 films, Peter Zeitlinger, he's an Austrian. What I like about him is that he's so physical, a very, very strong man. I mean, a chest like this, and he used to play ice hockey for Spartak Prague as a very young kid, and he's one of those who comes crawling after me in ice caves, and some of these tunnels are are only that low, and he comes with a camera in one hand on his belly, and it looks like a Steadicam. And you cannot imagine how did he do it. He comes just crawling on his belly behind me. And he's one, what I truly like about him is he has a very, very good physical sense for spaces, and we talked about this before. Zeitlinger is someone, we do a film, a scene for Rescue Dawn, 3 prisoners and 2 guards, and they're milling around, and the camera is swinging in at a certain moment for detail. And we shoot it once, and it didn't look right, and Zeitlinger puts the camera down, and he says, Werner, the scene has no rhythm. It's the first time I ever heard that from a cinematographer. And I looked at it, yes, he's totally right. The movements are not really coordinated. The dialogue is somehow held up because the camera hasn't been in position yet. So go for the essential, go for the scene and the dialogue. And the camera has to move in a different way. And the camera has to listen. Very often I keep saying to Zeitlinger, why did you move so early into it? Why don't you listen? The camera should not know before the people in dialogue know what they are saying. Listen to what's going on, and then make your move. So those are some of the qualities I really like about him. All the time I have to prevent him to do the kitsch postcard sunset. Whenever there's a sunset, and thanks God in Antarctica we never had a sunset because we have got 5 months of day. So, but had there been a sunset, he would have scrambled to put up the camera, and I have to hold him away from doing that. So sometimes he tries to put aesthetics into a shot, and I keep preaching to him, there's no aesthetics. Aesthetic has to come in as a natural concomitant of filmmaking. It has to enforce itself upon your movie anyway, no matter what you are doing. And it's the same thing like what forces you into the aesthetic of your handwriting. When you write a letter in longhand, your handwriting has a certain style, has a certain beauty. The moment you start to think and articulate the beauty, you could not write a good letter anymore. So it's a little bit like with a camera. The camera has to be a flowing and very natural part that is enforced upon the crew and ultimately enforced upon a screen.
One here,
So,
and
also. What I want to say, with all the cinematographers very, very physically close, normally I hold them by the belt, with one hand at the belt, and very often we move like ice skaters in pairs with the same step. Sometimes it looks very, very odd for outsiders to see us step in sync, and me with a hand on his belt. Mm-hmm. So. But we always functioned well like that.
We'll take one here. I'll also invite anybody in the balcony. We have 2 mics. Oh, there's one there. So we'll take you next after this one here.
I have a question about the value of life. A personal question. Before we started the interviews, you finished with this image of you standing at the volcano and mentioning your life wasn't worth so much relative to the universe. A great deal of your life seems defined by the dedication of embarking the heroic adventure. But how do you see your life as like the value of your life as a family man, like a husband or a father? Is that important to you?
Yes, sure. I try to do as good as I can, and of course it has a great value, and we are made for that, and we should not We should not somehow bypass what we are made for. We have to fulfill the law, yes. But at the same time, when you are speaking about as a contrast to that, the heroic adventure, number one, nothing I have done has been heroic. It has always been a chain of banalities. It's just a chain of banalities to be up on a volcano. It's even ridiculous, some of it. And I'm truly against the concept of adventure. I'm the last one who would ever like to be an adventurer. Adventure is a ridiculous concept, and how far it has degenerated. You can see that. You can buy an adventure trip through the travel agency here in Amsterdam. You can go to New Guinea, to the headhunters, to the savage headhunters, and have the experience of adventure in a group of tourists with their video cameras. So, and actually the question of adventure is being addressed in Encounters at the End of the World. Adventure had its final ridiculous, unglorious moment where it faded away, where it went away, when human beings were desperately trying to reach the North and the South Pole. That was the end of it. And adventure belongs into a different century. It belongs to the centuries where men would meet each other at dawn in pistol duels, and where damsels in distress would faint on a couch. That's where it belongs. But I'm not into this. I'm not buying it.
On the mic there.
Hello, my name is Hans Kuiper. I have a question about the sound in Encounters, because I was quite shocked about the level of volume that you used. I thought it was a bit disturbing, especially at the part of the lady choir. I think it's Bulgarian voices. Did you do this consciously? Why did you? Because I really had to close my ears. So
well, then the sound was turned too loud here in this theater.
That was not this theater; it was another one.
But then it was the
really
other
shocking.
one. No, I think what can I say? The balance of the sound itself between, let's say, dialogue, commentary voice, sound effects, and music is I think quite well established. If it hurt your ears, then it was someone who turned it too loud in a theater. So but of course, a projection of a movie in a theater is always a thing of life. Sometimes it sounds different if you are only 10, 12 people in a theater, and it sounds much more hollow. With a full theater, it's much more muffled. When it's too loud, then it's simply too loud. If it disturbed you, but I do believe that I'm very much aware of certain presences. How present should a music be? How present does a voice-over text have to be? Or how reduced would it be? In this diving scene where you hear the Bulgarian choir, there's nothing but music. And only once you hear some distorted, hollow-sounding breathing of a diver, very artificially. But it's the only event in something like a 4.5-minute sequence or 5-minute sequence.
And why do you choose then for this, for music in a scene like this? You could also have chosen for the natural sound. I mean, what's your general attitude towards the use of music with image?
Yeah, you cannot verbalize it. It's the best music at this moment, no doubt. I give you 5 years' time, and every music that's around, and you make your choice, and it will not be as good as mine.
Good.
Yeah, I'm a musician myself, so.
Yeah. In the middle there.
I have one question. Like a lot of characters in your movies seem to be obsessed. I mean, it's very much about people with an obsession, kind of an odd obsession sometimes. Sometimes that is hard to understand for others. And you seem to be obsessed by that obsession. So I was wondering, aside from that being objectively interesting in following that, how much do you identify usually with that obsession of these people? Like how much compassion do you have basically for them? And is there anything personal, like why you are so obsessed about obsessions of these people.
Yeah.
He's
Okay.
obsessed about your obsession.
Well, I'm not on the couch of an analyst here, nor I'm in a confessional. But it happens quite often that people think, yes, when we have a figure like Aguirre on screen, it is an easy mistake to think the maker of the film must be a man like him, or like Fitzgerald, or like Caspar Hauser, you just name it. So we have to caution here and separate the one who makes them. Sure, yes, they fascinate me. I have a certain compassion for them, but I'm certainly not obsessive at all. I'm a very professional man. I'm a storyteller, and I'm professional, and that's about it. So people, there's rumors around, yeah, he's not right in his head, and he's this kind of madman on a set, which I'm not. I'm the only one who is clinically sane on my set.
There's on the mic again.
Please, Mr. Herzog, I would like to know a little bit about your relationship to religion.
Difficult question again, because it's very personal. I would like to say only this. I grew up as a heathen, as a unbaptized, unreligious child in a family of militant atheists, and at age 14 I converted to become a Catholic. And it was a very dramatic, very dramatic, intensive phase of deep religious sentiment inside of me. And it somehow dwindled away fairly soon, and I'm not part of the Catholic Church anymore since many years. Although I have the feeling when you look at my films, there is something like a distant echo from that time in many of my films. There is something in it, even in Encounters at the End of the World, as if there were a distant, very far, faint, distant echo of that phase. So that's all I can say about it.
Right in the middle there.
Where's the microphone? Oh, yeah.
If you could pass the mic, please.
Thank you. So I wanted to ask you about another one of your fascinations, your fascination for the jungle. I remember in Burden of Dreams, which is obviously a very long time ago, I loved the way you spoke about the jungle as strangulation and murder, and not because you hated it, but because you loved it. And
against my better knowledge.
Against
yes.
your better knowledge.
Against my better judgment.
Against
yes.
your better judgment. That's I was just fascinated by that way of talking about the jungle, and I know that you still return to the jungle, and obviously Rescue Dawn was another return to a different jungle. And do you still love the jungle, and what does it mean to you, and how often do you go there?
I go there for making films, yes, but we shouldn't overemphasize it. I think I made 5 or 6 films in jungles, but I've made many more than that. I've made films on mountains or in ice and snow, and I've made films in the Sahara Desert and in other deserts. So we should not overemphasize it. A jungle is just another forest. There's nothing so special about it. However, I'm kind of doing all right, because there's always, when you work in a jungle, it's always very physical, and I'm always better in making a film when it's a physical sort of challenge in it. I'm doing all right when I'm in a jungle, and I do understand a jungle in terms of a translation onto a screen. So how I do it, I do not know exactly, but I'm coping all right. And there's also one thing that you mentioned about my speech about Mother Nature in Les Blanc's Burden of Dream. It's good to hear that it made some impact on you, because very often I'm kind of connected to German Romanticism, which is exactly the contrary when you hear, for example, moments like me speaking about the jungle in Les Blanc's film. there couldn't be any more contrast against romanticism, and I'm really against romanticizing wild nature. When you look at Grizzly Man, it's the most unromantic, un-Disney, distorted romanticism in me than in anyone around on this planet. And I've always raised my voice, and I've tried to explain, well, my fascinations are not in the epoch cultural fascinations, not connectable with romanticism. They are much easier connectable, let's say, with early Baroque poetry, or Luther's Bible translation, or the time of the great migrations in Europe, the 4th, 5th century. That's where my fascinations are, but not within the romantic culture. And of course, when you see how I'm dealing with the jungle, it's a most unromantic, straightforward dealing with this kind of forest.
In the middle there.
Hello. In several of your films, when you're interviewing subjects, for example, Grizzly Man, you let the subject say his or her statement. And where many other directors would simply cut to the next scene or shot after that person has finished speaking, you stay on their face, and there's a moment of silence, and you stay with it a bit longer, and then the moment changes, and that happened several times in Grizzly Man and some other films too. Mm-hmm. And then you carry on with your commentary, and however, in stark contrast to Little Dieter Needs to Fly, at the very beginning of the movie, it seems that you're going to do this. When the moment you ask Dieter, how does it feel, or what does it mean to you to be a hero? Then he says, no, I'm not a hero, only heroes are dead ones. Mm-hmm. And then the remainder of the film, you sort of let him tell his own story and not really interfering or doing the same tactics. Can you speak about that a bit?
Well, that's your impression as a spectator, but of course I had to enforce certain things on Dieter. Dieter would tell a story where I had something like, let's say, 4 or 5 minutes in the film. He would go for 40, 50 minutes and never stop and rattle on, and I run out of film, and I said, Dieter, come on, condense it, please condense it. So and then, for example, the most intense moment where he speaks about the death of his best friend who was decapitated by angry villagers. I think I shot it at least 6 times. 6 times, because the man would speak about, and when he was decapitated, then I ducked behind this rock, and then I heard the guys coming, and then I jumped behind another rock, and then he describes all the rocks behind which he ducked, and I stopped the camera and I said, Dieter, I'm not interested in the rocks, but I'm interested in the detail that you mentioned once, that when your friend was just, his head was chopped off, he had one sole of a tennis shoe on his foot, tied with rattan on it, and he ripped it off before he ran. I said, you forgot that detail. So now, next time he speaks about the shoe and the rattan, and he keeps 5 minutes talking about how he would tie and put the knot with a rattan, and rattan rips easily. And I said, Dieter, we have to do it again. Please be disciplined. You are a storyteller now. So until he finally got it right. So it's not that I let him do and let him just go on and never interfere. I even stylize and stage things in the film. You probably remember that one of the first things that you see about Dieter Dengler, he arrives at his home in his car, an old 1949 Buick, and he opens and closes the door and opens and closes, and then he walks at his house and he opens and closes the door, opens, closes, goes inside, and from inside you see that he opens and closes it, and then he comes out and he says, yeah, it may look strange, but this denotes freedom for me, to open and close a door whenever you want it. And that was what Dieter does not do in his regular life. He doesn't do that. But I asked him to do it because it turned out that this was an essential truth about Dieter. First time I walked into his house, right in the first corridor, you have the wall, and there's 6 or 7 or 8 canvas oil paintings, all of them open doors. all of them open doors. And I said to Dieter, well, these paintings, they all show open doors. What does it mean? He says, yeah, this is real freedom for me. And he says, open doors. And he looks, yeah, they are all open doors. And I said, why did you buy it? Yeah, well, they were only $10 a piece. It was a real bargain. That's why I bought them. So he didn't even understand what he had bought himself. And I said to him, Dieter, we have to make this essential sort of truth about you visible. We have to stage something, and of course it is staged, and that is what I would say is an illumination about his character, an intensified and ecstatic truth about Dieter Dengler, totally and utterly staged and invented. And yet it was not an invention at all. And that's what distinguishes me from most people who do documentaries, because they would dismiss that. And I think we have to step on in documentary filmmaking way, way beyond where we have been stuck for so long time.
We have time just for two more for people from the balcony. Yes.
Yeah. I have questions more on the fiction. Can you tell me about the role of? Tell me a little bit about the role of how storyboarding plays in your filmmaking, and also just sort of as a follow-up. Can you give me an idea how do you feel about the trend now for planning films completely in animatics and almost going shot for shot? Mm-hmm. The film's already done before you're actually on set.
That's an instrument of the idiots who do not trust in their abilities on a set, who do not trust in their fantasy on a set. It's an instrument of the cowards. That's all I can say. Has not made one film. Thank you for agreeing. Yes, has not made one film one bit better. It has made them only sterile, and that's what happens when you do it. However, I have used storyboard in one film for one short sequence in Rescue Dawn when Dieter Dengler is being shot down because we knew we had to digitally create the other planes flying next to him. There are no flight-worthy sky raiders around that we could have engaged for the film. So it was clear for these 30 seconds or so, a variety of shots, we have to have a digital effect. And in such cases, you better have a storyboard so that the digital effects people know exactly in the right corner of the image has to be one sky raider and banking away and diving away. Yes, it is needed for such moments. Yeah. Otherwise, storyboarding is just a signal of hopeless absence of fantasy on a set. It's just the losers are using it.
We'll give the last question to Rajesh there.
For me, you're the king of documentary voiceover, and I just wondered if you could talk about your approach to writing the commentary in your films.
I write it so fast that you wouldn't even believe it. While I'm editing, I'm writing the text, and I normally have a microphone. I edit digitally now since quite a few films, and I speak the commentary as I wrote it down immediately to the image, and then all of a sudden I see, well, this sentence is too long, it goes beyond the cut, so I rephrase it sometimes, but I do it very, very quickly, comes to me very easily, and how can I say, it's also a question of voice. Yes, I do it because for the kind of financial background and the setup of things, I do it in English and in German, and my voice is quite okay. It makes a film more authentic, makes a film, gives a certain flavor. For me, unthinkable that a well-trained actor with a well-trained voice would speak my commentaries. I wouldn't allow that. Mm. It would be no good. Mm. And I don't care how bad my accent is. It's just you have to take it and accept it, and or you don't like it, and then I can't help it. Yes, thank you very much.
I would like you to thank the man with the voice, the man with the vision,
thank you.
Saint among saints, Werner Harzog. At 1 o'clock, there'll be a screening here of Grizzly Man, and tonight a screening of Encounters at the End of the World, and Werner will be answering questions after those films. Tomorrow at 4 p.m. in Tuschinski 2, there will be a debate about truth and lies, and Werner and Hubert Sauper will be at that debate.